What healthcare data people can learn from Disney. Okay, before we get to Disney though, quick story time. If you're into restaurants or food, you've heard of Alinea, right? Thumbs up from Hyunmin. Can you tell us, have you been?
I haven't been in person because it's very expensive. It's
Yeah.
one of I think it's the only three Michelin star restaurant in Chicago. But during the lockdown, they had takeout menus. So you could have like
Did,
a six-course meal.
did you get the
For,
beef Wellington?
no, not
Okay,
really. It was
cool.
a tasting menu, but it was
Sweet.
pretty cool. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. So Alinea, correct, straight out of my outline here, the only three-star Michelin restaurant in Chicago. In 2016, TripAdvisor named Alinea number one in the United States, top 10 in the world, won a James Beard Foundation Award, and they take the dining experience quite seriously. So for one thing, when you are going to eat at Alinea, you don't do the stupid dance with the reservation. I've heard the founder talk about this, but like, how dumb is it that when you want to eat at a restaurant, you call the restaurant and you say like, I'm thinking that there are going to be about eight of us, and we're going to be there about 8 o'clock, and the restaurant is like, yeah, we might or might not have a table ready for you. Compare that to what you do at Alinea. You buy a ticket because you're not going to a restaurant, you're going to a show. And so then when you arrive at the door, the host welcomes you, and they welcome you by name because they've been expecting you. And of course, your table is ready. There's no waiting room because why would you want to be in a waiting room? Waiting rooms are no fun. All right. So, and then when you get served a course of food, well, it's not really served to you, it's presented to you. And it has a story to go with it because this is performance art. This is not a dining hall. And some of the dishes they'll make you gasp with the sheer theater of the presentation. Some will make you chuckle because it's really goofy to have like a block of wood on a fine dining table. Some of the dishes make you want to study them, like with an engineering schematic, because like how did they even do that? And then of course there, like any performance, there's a grand finale that in this case involves liquid nitrogen, edible paint, shattering balls of chocolate on the table, and then last there's an encore, and in this case it was a helium balloon made out of candy. And for me at least, they sent me home with like a going away present. They sent me a copy of the menu, and I still have that to this day. And now I hope you'll notice that I just told you about one of the most memorable restaurant experiences of my life, and I never once mentioned how the food tasted. It's fine dining. I mean, the food obviously tasted good, but that's kind of the bare minimum. That's the least you can do to be a fine dining restaurant. So smart businesses in a lot of industries have figured out that in order to really be exceptional, you can't just do your main thing well. You have to do everything well. So from the moment a person is under your care or in your space to the moment they leave, you have to consider everything. And so before I move on, any questions? Okay. So one of the most advanced companies in this line of thinking is Disney, Hyunmin.
Oh, it's not a question, but something that was like, I think I will keep in the back of my mind. So Alinea is the top of the top.
Mm-hmm.
It's one in a million.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to like make an analogy with this in healthcare, I think there might be a slight discrepancy. Because you can like take the top healthcare system and say that, oh, they're the Alinea of the healthcare, but can you demand such standard for everyone in the industry? I think we can hope for that, but not in the short run. That was what I was thinking.
Oh, totally agree. And I think there are a lot of reasons that the degree of difficulty is harder in healthcare than in other industries. Like people talk about high reliability. So, for example, at an amusement park, like at a Disney, if there is a safety risk, you can just shut down the rides and say, "Sorry, nobody's riding this ride until we're confident it's safe to ride on." But when people are in the hospital, when they're sick, you can't just pause the hospital. You have to keep treating them, even if there's a chance that what you're doing might be harmful because the patient might not have long anyway. So the degree of difficulty is certainly higher in healthcare. And I would submit that even the most advanced healthcare systems, your Theta Cares, your Intermountains, whoever else, even they would agree that they have much to learn from places like Alinea and Disney. So Disney has this idea that you'll recognize from the Alinea story, and I'm going to work on tying it back to healthcare properly in a minute. But so the Disney principle is everything you do either adds to or takes away from the guest experience. So they're basically, you have no neutral interactions. You can either improve the guest experience or make it worse. And so Disney does everything in their power to make sure that their guests have a distinctly memorable experience. And so they lean on a few kinds of principles. One of the principles is that everyone is a performer. Now, this character in the, anyone know which of the seven dwarves that is? Is that Dopey?
Is that
No,
Doc?
it's Doc. It's for sure Doc. You're right. All right, this guy in the Doc costume, this person in the Doc costume, obviously knows that they're a performer. But one thing that's ingrained in the Disney leadership is that whether you're a performer like this, a manager, even somebody who cleans the park, you're a performer. And so the performance is for the guest, and anytime a guest is within sight or can hear you, then you're considered to be on stage, and you have to be show ready. And even they don't call them employees; they call them cast members to further solidify this notion that this is a performance for the benefit of the guest. And so they work on giving people their attention, eye contact, smiling, communicating. And they take this so far as to say, like, if you're dressed in a futuristic costume because you work in Tomorrowland, then you would never show up in that costume in the like rustic adventure area. You would like take the underground tunnels, because to show up in your Tomorrowland costume in a place where that doesn't fit, that would be incongruous to the guest and would take away from their experience. At Disney, they try even to make waiting in line enjoyable. So like they'll have stuff like visual barriers so that at any given time you might be waiting in a 45-minute line, but you're never seeing all the people ahead of you. You're just seeing a small subset of them. And along the way, there are these little handcrafted bits and pieces and jokes and thematically appropriate knickknacks for you to stop and admire and laugh at and talk about with your family. And so all of that is helping them improve the experience, even a part of it that is not going to be like the most fun part. Another idea they have is that a cast member who's helping somebody, they own that person, they own that guest until the guest gets what they're looking for. So you don't pass somebody off to somebody else. You escort them to wherever they're going. And sometimes you have to drive them in a golf cart. Sometimes you're taking them like literally from the place where you work to another resort or another hotel. But like until the guest gets to where they're going, you own them. And so one of the underpinnings there is that the guests are not a burden. They're not interrupting your job. They are your job. And then the last thing is they really try to understand their guests deeply. So it would be common to ask somebody, are you visiting for a special occasion? Is it your birthday or something like that? And if it is their birthday, they have a birthday sticker that they can put on that person. Or and so then other cast members who see the birthday sticker, they can say happy birthday to you, or happy anniversary, or what a beautiful family you have at your family reunion. So that can give them a more continuous experience. And the other thing they do about understanding the guests is that they recruit their leadership from the front lines. So people who have been frontline staff who have understood the guest experience at a deep level, they are more likely to be promoted because they can speak to like what it's actually like to serve the guest. All right, so we've talked in the past about how some people are not excited about seeking healthcare. Like maybe they're afraid they're going to go broke. They don't trust that the provider is acting in their best interests. What a sad notion. Sometimes there's a negative stigma attached to even get to going for healthcare, especially mental health, like we were talking about last week. And it's true that when you need healthcare, it can be like an emotional time. By the way, have you ever heard anybody rave about a healthcare experience?
Never.
Never. So, by the way, I'll just go ahead and mark that as the argument for everybody has plenty to learn from Disney and Alinea. All right, but I actually had a pretty good healthcare experience that I'm going to tell you guys about. And that was when my wife was pregnant the first time. So she was 5 days past her due date. She was extremely pregnant, miserable, ready to have the baby. So she went into labor on a Sunday morning, and everything was proceeding like clockwork. The data people who are listening to this will appreciate. So we had on the pregnancy app, you can time your contractions. And so it's just like a little stopwatch, contraction start, contraction stop. And then it shows you your splits, just like your splits if you're swimming or something like that. And so we could see that the contractions were getting shorter, like 6 seconds shorter every single time. Oh, it was such a beautiful trend line. I mean, the linear regression would have an R squared of like 96%. So the contractions are getting close enough together. We leave for the hospital. And at the hospital, they did something that good hospitals do. They asked us what our goals were. And, everybody goes into a birth experience or any healthcare experience with like different levels of experience, like different levels of baseline knowledge. And so we told them, this is what's important to us. First, have a healthy baby. We prefer to have a vaginal delivery because those are healthier for mommy and baby for a lot of different reasons. C-sections are actually kind of serious surgery and kind of dangerous. And my wife wanted plenty of pain relief early and often. So she got the epidural, got a couple hours sleep, and then around 9 o'clock in the morning, it was time to push. And so my wife pushed and pushed for 2 hours, and just nothing happened. The baby hardly moved at all. We were, monitoring the baby's vital signs the entire time. The baby was healthy, but she wasn't moving. And after 2 hours of this, I mean, my wife is completely and totally exhausted, just like a full body exhaustion from just having to work every single muscle as hard as she could. And I was emotionally drained, didn't have much sleep, and was helping my wife through a really, a small t trauma right here. And so we were both just really had no idea what to do. And so our OB, the doctor who was serving us, she really embraced the Disney principles at this point. So she took ownership of getting us to our destination. So she said, she actually told us her own story. She said, when I was having my first baby, I really wanted to have a vaginal birth too. I got just a little bit farther than you did, and then we ended up having to use a vacuum to pull my baby out. This is the doctor speaking, these gave me a grade 3 tear, and it took me months to recover from that. Don't do what I did. Let's take you to the operating room, and let's go get your baby. And so this, and she's saying this in a really soft, compassionate voice. And so my wife and I are looking at each other. I can't make this decision for my wife, but I know what I want to do at that point. So we were looking at each other like tears in our eyes, and we both slowly nodded. We're like, yeah, that sounds good. Let's do that. And so we did. Got the baby out by C-section. Everything went great. Oh, sorry, I had some visuals for that. This is the baby that came out that day. That was 4.5 years ago. So this baby turned into a person. And obviously it was a hospital. There were lots of annoying moments in the hospital. Like right before we went into the OR, or when my wife was in the OR already, and I was wearing a sterile bunny suit, waiting to go in. There was nobody with me. The room was dark. All the lights were off. I was sitting in a rocking chair, and I was 100% convinced that they had forgotten about me, that they were just going to deliver the baby. And they were like, oh shit, there's Adam. Oh, hey, good news. Here's your baby. That didn't happen. It just took a while to prep her for surgery. But and so there were some inconvenient moments, but that amazing moment with the doctor who just kind of bared her soul and shared with us her experience and carried us on her back to the destination. That's something I'll remember for a long time, and it's not a moment I associate with the hospital. It's a moment I associate with that doctor. So that's our birth story. Wasn't actually planning on telling that today, but it was too good to pass up. But so the idea of using the Disney principles in healthcare is absolutely not new, not novel in the slightest. In fact, it's such a popular idea that so there's a Disney Management Institute, Disney teaching other people how to run their businesses like Disney. And this idea is so popular that they actually have entire programs that are dedicated to healthcare. The issue is it's not easy to implement because, I would argue, all the important jobs take emotional labor. And it's one thing to do emotional labor for your clients, with your clients, if you're like a single professional. I would say it's quite another to deliver emotional labor at scale, like to have institutional emotional labor. And I would argue that that's what Disney is trying to do. Disney is trying to say, to deeply internalize what their guests hopes, fears, dreams, and desires, and then help their people deliver them at scale. Train it to be a system and a process where people can have emotional experiences. That's really hard work, and so it's no surprise that in healthcare, and already something that's already challenging to deliver, and something that's already a really emotional part of a person's life, it would be extra tough. All right, so let's connect this, if we can, to the data work. So, in my opinion, there are three kind of standard types of healthcare data work. You're doing a report or an analysis, you're giving a presentation, or you're creating like an interactive data product. Now, creating an interactive data product, there's just kind of a lot there, so I'm going to leave that for another time. So I'm going to focus on presentations and reports. So principles I would suggest: number one, a presentation is a performance. Duh. So consider yourself, if you're giving a presentation, you should consider yourself to be quote unquote on stage, like at Disney. And you're on stage not when you get up to give the presentation, you're on stage when you enter the room. And ideally, you're entering the room several minutes early to make sure you put your thumb drive in, or you access your presentation on the shared drive. Ideally, you've practiced your presentation and you know that it's going to fit into the time allotted to you. A lot of times, if you're a healthcare analyst, you're going to be presenting in like a leadership meeting. You're not the only thing that's going on in that meeting. So you got to make sure you can fit in the time, including the Q&A section. You're going to test the projector. You're going to walk the audience not just through the answer to the question, but to why is the question important and how did you get to the answer? Because that's going to give them more confidence in the answer you arrived at. You should also know somebody's going to want the slides at the end, and you need to have two versions of the slides ready. One that you give with the presentation, probably that doesn't have a lot of words on it, and then another one basically with all your points spelled out in words. So a presentation is a performance? Yeah, obviously. I would say a report is a performance too, or an analysis. So one thing I would suggest you do, every analyst who is watching this or listening to this, they know like that thing you do with Excel where you got the raw data and then you got the first pivot table and the second pivot table and then the analysis tab and then analysis final, analysis version 2, final version 2. Get rid of all those tabs in the middle. And make sure that the presentation is saved so that when the Excel sheet is saved so that when it opens to the final analysis slide. And you should also assume your email is going to get forwarded, and you should include the context, like why were you asked this question and what was the conclusion, like in a couple sentences or in one screenshot. Include all that in the email so that when it gets forwarded, the context is obvious. All right. That was a lot. That was trying to connect healthcare data work back to the emotional labor of Disney and Alinea. And I'll stop there and wonder what you guys have to say.
I think it generally like makes sense, right? Like overall that you should, I mean, okay, so what I'm getting from this is kind of like treating everything or like every task that you have like with the same care that you would like something that you like a presentation or a performance or like just caring a lot about like the details and like the process of it too.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I would also kind of add that, well, I don't know. I think, Disney makes a really strong distinction between when you're facing the guest and when you're not facing the guest. And so I think for data people, client facing can kind of take a lot of different forms. Like, sure, when you send the email, that's client facing time. But when you're in the cave doing the work, probably not client facing time. And so I think it's about being thoughtful about what is the client or the whoever it is who's consuming the work, what is their experience going to be from the time they start interacting with the work to the time that they're done interacting with the work. And if you know that they're going to take the work and repurpose it or use it downstream from you, making it easy for them to repurpose and reuse downstream. And that's the idea of like, assume your email is going to get forwarded, assume somebody's going to want the slides, etc. Go ahead.
Would these things count as emotional labor too? Because I remember you saying that it's a performance and you have to own your clients, and if it's an important job, it has some emotional labor aspect to it. But if your clients are healthcare managers or providers, what kind of emotional work would you be doing as a data analyst?
Totally. Well, so yeah, I really like that you connected that to like getting the person to their destination. So like one aspect of getting the person to their destination is like maybe they have a tough decision in front of them. So you do an analysis and the analysis tells them something unexpected. Well, they're going to have follow-up questions. And I think I would argue that it's your job to field those follow-up questions and like do the second level analysis to make sure that they're getting the right information to make their decision. And then as far as emotional labor, right, I think it's having some sensitivity to not just the primary audience, but maybe the secondary audience. So if, let's say, you are presenting to a nursing manager, well, would your presentation speak for itself if you weren't there to give it, but if just a frontline nurse saw your slides?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So it's like, so is there more of an emphasis on also like being efficient as well with like the information that you're trying to convey, or just like even presenting it in a way that's easily understood by like an average person who wouldn't know anything about it?
Yeah, well, I think that's a common thread in everything we do is what we're taught in college is that if you use the most mature vocabulary, that shows how smart you are. But in fact, in business, I think it's the opposite. I think the more simply, the fewer words you can say, and so get the point across in a way that that helps the next person understand the idea or understand the data. I think that's preferable. So yeah, and so when I say, you walk the audience through the question and the process and the answer in your presentation, it doesn't mean you take forever to do it. But but if you just leap to the answer, then that's not going to satisfy a person who needs to communicate this to the next person. So yeah, I think there's a balance to be struck there between being respectful of other people's time and still giving them enough information to do what they need.
So it sounded like this Disney mindset is going to be useful for any kind of business in any industry. Is there something you would emphasize for people in healthcare?
I mean, if you're actually delivering healthcare, and it's hard and I believe that most of the people who would be watching or listening to this are not themselves delivering healthcare. They're probably trying to enable the people who are delivering healthcare. But all the same, I think it's important. I think one of the things that is overlooked more often is that the audience, if you like, is not just the patient. The audience is also the patient's family. And I think, especially for people who are very sick, the audience, making sure you're taking care of the family is even more important, because the family is going to decide, do we want this patient treated here, or are we going to use our legal power of attorney to get them transferred downstate to a higher level of care? Do we trust this doctor? So I think taking care of the family members, that was my story with when my wife was in the operating room, is like I felt abandoned, and that didn't make me hate the hospital. I had enough good experiences that outweighed that one, but you could see that five more of those kind of experiences would leave me not trusting that this is a place that was really taking care of us. And actually, so, all right, now while we're on the subject of healthcare, this reminds me, we were also talking about behavioral health and primary care. And we were saying that primary care with integrated behavioral health can be more successful than primary care that just recommends behavioral health. And this sounds a lot to me like the Disney idea of you own the guest until they get to their destination. Well, if your guest, if your patient in this case, has a mental or behavioral health need, and you give them a slip of paper and say, call this phone number and try to make an appointment, I hope they can see you, that feels like hanging your patient out to dry. And I feel like that's an obvious breakdown in care that could be done better.
This is more of like a general question, but so I'm thinking about the comparison of healthcare to a private corporation like Disney, as well as even maybe like Alinea is like an example too.
Yeah.
He's like really powerful, and like, because like Disney is very like, yeah, these models and designs and like the way that they cater to the guest, as well as like paying, essentially like paying customers,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like people pay for that experience to kind of to have that, and Disney's able to like capitalize off of that.
Yeah.
And it's, I guess I'm interested in the ways that like, and how business like transfers to healthcare, because like healthcare is an essential service that everybody needs, whereas not everybody likes Disney, or
Yeah.
Disney actually is kind of even becoming, more of like a monopoly and like buying up everything, and like those kind of like behind the scenes things. I don't know. Is that
Yeah.
is that part of the comparison as well, or is it like just about like literally the experience of attending and like being there?
It's a really interesting question to get into, especially because with healthcare industry consolidation, there is a bunch of monopolistic type behavior. And Siamala, I think you and I were talking behind the scenes about in Michigan, there are very few players in the health insurance market. And those players feel like they can get away with a lot of monopolistic behaviors. So I think, I don't know, it's a hard one, because you don't want to say like, if a business gets too good, then we have to break them up, because there's a reason they were successful in the first place, is that they took really good care of people, and they really met their needs well. But at the same time, if just because you were successful in the past at serving people's needs, if you change and then take advantage of your monopoly position, that's not cool either. So I mean, I think the government has a big role to play in making sure healthcare serves us. And the nice thing is that, the evidence I can see is that overwhelmingly, the people in healthcare, from leadership down to the front lines, they want to serve patients well. And it's a very difficult job. And I think to the extent that they can emulate Disney in terms of thinking of the entire customer experience and thinking about the emotional labor, I think that will benefit everybody who consumes healthcare.
Yeah, absolutely.
Shall we close it there?
Yeah, I don't have any other questions.
Cool.